establishing central influence and eyeing the queenside diagonal. This opening gambit immediately contests space. Securing the d5 square and building a solid pawn chain, this choice prepares for central presence but slightly restricts the queen's diagonal. Aiding development, the knight prepares to contest central squares and bolster king's safety. Initiating central pawn tension immediately challenges white's English opening ambition, forcing a confrontation for vital squares. Opening that central file can lead to sharp tactical battles or strategic pawn play, depending on how the ensuing exchanges unfold. Reclaiming central space with the pawn immediately opens lines for your pieces and maintains an active pawn structure. Fortifying the central pawn chain, white aims for a robust pawn majority and potential queenside space. Developing the knight to its natural square, this move sets the stage for a dynamic central battle and prepares to castle. Developing this knight firmly establishes central control and prepares for castling, subtly challenging black's pawn structure. Developing the knight to its natural square, black prepares to challenge the central pawn structure and expand influence. Developing the bishop actively, this establishes control over the central light squares, subtly preparing a queenside pawn push. Developing the bishop actively contests the d4 pawn and prepares to seize control of key diagonals. Solidifying the pawn center, this prepares to develop the queen's bishop and potentially castle, while maintaining flexibility. Solidifying the central pawn structure and preparing to develop the kingside bishop, this move promotes a controlled, positional game. Aiming to disrupt black's harmonious development, this bishop repositions to control the a4-e8 diagonal and potentially pressure the queenside pawns. Asserting control over the central diagonal, this bishop simultaneously pressures white's knight and reinforces black's central pawn structure. Introducing a knight to a more active square can pressure black's central pawn structure. Unleashing the queen to eye distant outposts, black boldly challenges white's well-placed bishop and seeks tactical complications. Sacrificing the bishop here exchanges a powerful attacker for a pawn, weakening black's queenside structure immeasurably. A necessary recapture that solidifies black's central pawn structure, while opening the b-file for potential future activity. Securing the monarch's safety is paramount, especially with an open central pawn structure. Shattering the symmetrical pawn structure offers white doubled pawns, but opens lines for black's pieces. Doubling pawns on the queenside now provides an open b-file for counterplay, but at the cost of structural weaknesses. Securing the open file with the rook creates immediate central pressure and activates a key piece for future attacks. Unleashing central space, this advance aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and gain a queenside initiative. Finally, the monarch secures their safety behind a pawn wall, preparing for potential central battles. Launching a pawn storm on the kingside, white aggressively challenges black's king's safety and aims for queenside space. Repositioning the bishop to a more active diagonal, it aims to exchange itself for white's strong knight and disrupt their pawn structure. Pushing the c-pawn aggressively claims crucial queenside space and aims to disrupt black's pawn structure, potentially opening lines for white's rooks. The knight repositions to the central outpost, eyeing weaknesses and preparing to harass the advanced white pawns. Aggressively pushing the f-pawn now, white seeks to disrupt black's queenside harmony and create dynamic play, potentially opening lines towards the enemy king. Unleashing the knight to disrupt white's pawn structure and eye the queen's flank is a bold, albeit risky maneuver. Repositioning the rook prepares for potential queenside pressure and supports the pawn push while keeping the king safe. Unleashing a knight to harass the queenside, this maneuver creates immediate discomfort and forces white to reevaluate pawn structure defenses. This exchange neutralizes black's active queen and simplifies the board, aiming to exploit the doubled pawns. Unlocking the d-file offers dynamic counterplay, promising active piece play against white's doubled pawns. Unleashing the bishop to target black's weak queenside pawns offers a long-term positional advantage. Gaining tempo on the bishop, this retreat solidifies the queenside pawn structure and prepares a central pawn push. Unlocking the d-file and expanding central influence, white boldly claims territory. Black gambits a pawn to shatter white's pawn structure and create attacking chances on the kingside. Securing the queenside pawn chain becomes a priority with this move, aiming to solidify white's territory. Breaking the pawn chain invites complications, sacrificing central control for counterplay. Reclaiming the central pawn structure after the tactical skirmish solidifies white's space and prepares for a queenside pawn push. Black aims to exploit the weakened queenside pawn structure by activating the queen and pressuring white's isolated c-pawn. Asserting control over the central files while preparing a kingside pawn advance is the aim here. Targeting the king's defenses with the queen, a bold infiltration aiming to exploit the exposed white monarch. Sensing the unleashed tactical potential, white redirects the rook's defensive pressure, preparing to contest the vital central files. Opening the contested c-file now solidifies black's control, a crucial step toward unraveling white's weakened queenside structure. The rook's relocation prepares for potential central advancement and reinforces control over the now open file, aiming to disrupt black's passive position. Retreating the queen to h6 appears to be a defensive maneuver, but it abandons central control and invites further pressure on black's position. Securing the central pawn with the queen activates her, eyeing the queenside pressure black built. A bold attempt to seize the initiative. This queen repositioning gambles on disruption rather than solid development. Reasserting central influence, this repositioning aims to dislodge black's active queen and prepare for future pawn thrusts. Sacrificing material to seize the initiative, black aims to disrupt white's central control and open lines for their remaining pieces. Reclaiming the opened file, this rook repositions to contest the center and prepare for potential kingside advances. The queen's repositioning seeks to exploit the weakened queenside pawn structure and create potential threats along the light squares. Launching a pawn storm to pry open the kingside, aiming to exploit the exposed monarch. A strategic sidestep, this offers the rook a safer haven while preparing for potential activity on the kingside. Pressing the pawns forward unravels black's kingside, exposing them to potential infiltration. Finally, the bishop retreats, seeking a safer square to observe the unfolding complications. Activating the rook along the open file, aiming to disrupt black's queenside initiative and potentially create a mating threat. Securing the queen's access to the central squares is crucial for future complications. Securing the queen's escape squares and threatening a discovered attack on the d-pawn offers white a vital tempo. Chasing the queen again, a bold but risky repositioning, hoping to outmaneuver white's pieces. Aggressively pushing the g-pawn further opens lines, creating urgent attacking possibilities against black's isolated king. Challenging the central pawn chain to pry open lines for the rooks becomes paramount now. Exploiting the open file, this pawn push aggressively targets the weakened kingside structure, aiming to pry open lines for further attack. Opening the center with this pawn thrust gambles on creating dynamic counterplay against white's exposed king. Sacrificing the bishop here opens lines, creating immediate threats around black's monarch. Seeking to unblock the queen's path, black contests the open b-file, hoping to disrupt white's central pawn advances. Shifting the queen here aims to exploit the open central files, potentially forcing a breakthrough against black's somewhat exposed king. Gaining space on the queen's side opens up potential breakthroughs and prevents white from consolidating comfortably. Refocusing the rook's attention to the weakened kingside defense. Unveiling a vital diagonal, black aims to disrupt white's queenside control and prepare for potential breakthroughs. Opening the d-file relentlessly fractures black's defenses, forcing a positional reckoning. Capturing the pawn opens the c-file, aiming to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure and activate black's rooks for counterplay. Seizing the c-file finally opens avenues for white's rook, and creates immediate pressure. Reclaiming open lines and central control, this defender aims to disrupt White's pawn storm and prepare for a counteroffensive. Seizing the 7th rank, this move decisively controls the crucial open file, preparing to exploit White's exposed king. Unleashing the queen from its cramped position on the file finally allows for counterplay, targeting the now exposed White king. Securing the rook's egress via the newly opened d-file becomes paramount.